Hi everyone. Welcome back to another remote session for statistical models. Today I'm just going to be showing you guys a review. We're going to revisit fitting of multiple linear regression models in R and logistic regression models in R as well to help you guys for your final projects. And then also we're going to take a look, and for those who are interested, although certainly not required, we're going to look at a neural network and how to fit those in R, which you're welcome to do for your final project as well. And I'd be happy to help with that as well if that's something you're interested in. So just for those who are interested, we'll look at that as well today. But to start, so to recap, so far in the course, we've learned about multiple linear regression, ANOVA, which stands for analysis of variance, and logistic regression models. And now we can use those to model different types of responses. Today, as I said, I'm going to show and revisit fitting those in R to help with your final project. So to recap, starting with multiple linear regression. Oh, and as a heads up, this HTML document that I'm working through here is posted on Moodle, and I would encourage you to walk through this file as we go through this video together. So so to start, for multiple linear regression, MLR for short, we are modeling a single quantitative or continuous response y using k number of predictor variables, which we denote with x1 through xk. So the theoretical model, or the assumed model, is given by this equation here. So we're assuming that y is equal to a linear combination of the predictor variables plus some error term epsilon, okay? Where we're assuming that the epsilons are independent and identically distributed, IID, normal with mean 0, and constant variance sigma squared. Okay, so these are just some of the theoretical assumptions. We listed them out before more separately, so it'll certainly be good to check those in your project, that the errors are normally distributed. So we look at residual plots for those, or histograms. QQ plots and histograms specifically are good for checking normality. For checking constant variance, again, we want to look at the residual bifided plot. And yeah, so for this example data set, I'm going to be revisiting one we've seen in class before. So this penguins data set. And if you want to see the code to reproduce everything we're doing in this handout, you can just click on these code buttons as we go along. So here I'm loading the tidyverse package, Palmer Penguins package, and Cable Extra, which is just helpful for R Markdown, which is how I made this HTML document here. Okay, so I load the data, the Penguins data set, after making sure to load the Palmer Penguins package first. Then I import the Penguins data like this, and just looking at the first 5 rows here, we see that we have the species of penguin again, the island that the penguin is on, bill length in millimeters, bill depth in millimeters of the penguins, flipper length millimeters, body mass in grams, the sex of the penguin, and then the year of the measurement being taken. So we're not going to consider all these variables today in my examples and in our example here, but we're going to look at some of them. So start with some exploratory data analysis. Okay, so using the summary function in R here, we're looking at each column in the data set here, and this tells us different aspects about it. So for example, here, the species column is a character column, and it's telling us that 152 observations in the data set are for Adelie penguins, 68 for chinstrap, and 124 for Gentoo. And similarly for the island variable and the sex variable, that's how that information is displayed. These NAs are for not applicable. They're just, these rows are not applicable for character variables is pretty much what's happening. So bill length is the first continuous or quantitative variable in this data set. And this is telling us the minimum value, the mean, and the max. And then it's actually telling us that there's 2 missing values in terms of bill length in this data set. So that'll be good to keep in mind moving forward. Just plotting the data, which is always very important to do for exploratory data analysis. Plotting bill length by bill depth here. And here's the code for doing that if you're curious. We can see that there's certainly potentially a relationship between bill depth and bill length, which is not too surprising of penguins, right? Like the bigger the depth of their bill, the longer we expect their bills probably to be for these penguins. So, and that seems to be the case. There's this positive linear relationship. And it seems like especially within a species. So these points are colored by species here. And we see that, if we imagine like a straight line going through within each cloud of points, it's positive and linear, but there is a separation depending on which species we're looking at. Okay, and we sort of affirm that again, just in the mean bill length within each species. So using a box plot, this is showing us how the chinstrap penguins have on average the highest or the longest bill lengths, followed by gentoo and then adelie. So species, if we're going to model the bill length of a penguin, certainly seems like species is an important factor to consider, because these box plots are not just horizontally aligned with one another. Okay. I also noted here that we noticed the 2 missing values from before. So if we want to just remove any missing values, any rows in our data set with any missing value for any of the variables, we can just use this complete.cases function and just removing those values. So since there was only 2 missing values in the whole data set, I just removed them here. But in general, there are more sophisticated, better ways to handle missing values in a data set. So this is a very, this is like a whole area of statistics and knowledge in itself, is how to handle missing values properly. Some general approaches are, of course, just removing them, just excluding those rows from our data set. But we lose some information because not all of the columns for that had missing values. So there were no NAs for the species of penguin, but there were 2 NAs for bill length. So we lose some information, but sometimes that's the best approach. Other times, you can use other approaches such as imputation approaches, where you use like predictive modeling approaches to actually use the other variables in the data set to guess what that missing value was. So if here, for example, since species and island are included and the sex of the penguin, the year, those don't have any missing values, we could use those in a regression model itself based on the complete data here to try and predict what the bill length should be and sort of fill those values in, fill in the gaps, the missing gaps in our data set. There's trade-offs between all the different approaches you can take, but just to make you aware of some of those things. So hopefully for your guys' data sets, they'll be pretty clean, so you don't have to worry about any missing values. Just interpreting your models here is what I'm hoping. So, but just as a heads up so that you're aware. So once we've done exploratory data analysis, then we can go on to fitting the models. So here we're looking at modeling the bill length, and we're considering just using bill depth to start. So fitting this model and plotting our line of best fit, this is the regression model that we get. So this is interesting because we see that the line has a downward slope. It has a negative slope, which is somewhat surprising. So this is a bit of an odd relationship, because if we look within each species, we'd expect sort of a positive linear relationship. But when you pool all of them together, you end up with this negative relationship. So that's not good. It's a reason why it's important to include species in our model, because otherwise these predictions are going to be very poor here. So adding in species, which again, you can click on these little code boxes to see. Adding in species, now we see that our p-values are all very small, very close to 0, so that's good. Let's see how they were before. Yeah, they were close to 0 before, but our R squared and adjusted R squared were pretty small, 0.05. Now let's see. Look at that improvement. That is a dramatic improvement by including species in our model in terms of the adjusted R squared. So huge improvement in terms of the amount of variability we're explaining in our response by including species. So now let's take a look at our fitted values. So using this code, which is a bit complicated, but we can get the predicted lines within each species, and I colored them according to species. Now we can see that, yeah, these lines of best fit much more it fit the data well. So we don't have this negative relationship that doesn't seem true to the data here. This is a much better fit based on the scatter plot here. Okay. And just if you're curious, this was using what we call base R code, because you don't have to load any extra packages to do this. Using ggplot2, the ggplot2 package, we can produce sort of a similar looking plot where we have lines for each subgroup. And it's a little bit shorter code, a little bit nicer looking, some people think. So just a couple different ways to do that. And this is nice because it also tells us which species corresponds to which color. So yeah, so that was how we could fit the model in R here. Looking sort of retrospectively, does the linearity assumption hold up? So after accounting for species, yeah, it appears to be fairly linear relationships within each group. So certainly that seems reasonable here. So that was a quick recap of multiple linear regression in R. And like I said, throughout, the purpose of me doing this walkthrough for you guys is that you can sort of use this code as a template for your own analyses. So feel free to click on these code boxes and copy this code as needed and modify it for your own data set. So for your final projects, you'll need to do multiple linear regression with at least one continuous predictor, which in this case was build depth, and one categorical predictor, at least, which was species in this case. I'm also asking you guys to fit a logistic regression model with at least one categorical predictor and one continuous predictor. So for this example, we're going to look at a different data set here. So, but before we get to that, first, just to recap the multiple logistic regression model. So instead of just modeling the response directly, we're modeling this function of the mean response. So pi, the probability of success, is the sort of mean response. Okay. So for logistic regression, we're considering y, where y is either equal to 0 or 1, and the probability that y is equal to 1 is denoted by pi. And just like with linear regression, we're going to use k number of explanatory variables for this model. And what we're doing is we're relating the log odds of success to a linear combination of the predictor variables. Okay. So pi, again, is the probability of success. Pi over 1 minus pi, the odds of success. And log is log base e here, the natural log. So this example that we're going to look at is on credit card default. So whether or not somebody's defaulting on their credit card payments. And this is from University of California, Irvine, UCI. Okay. If you want to look at this data yourself, I wrote code to download this file for you and then read it into R. So R does all this. It grabs the data set off the web, reads it into R, cleans it up for you if you want to follow along. Okay, and we have lots of different columns in this data set. So all of these things, though, are potential predictors that we have for whether or not someone defaults on their credit card. So you can imagine for companies, lots of times they have these outcomes like this that are of interest. Capital One certainly probably is very interested in whether someone that they give a credit card out to will default on it or not. They want to know the risk of that because it can help them set interest rates or determine who they want to allow to have credit cards or not. So the morals of that is another question in itself, but just thinking of it from a business perspective objectively, you can see how this is of interest for companies that want to make money. So another example that's similar is for like a regression modeling class for the graduate statistics regression modeling class at Minnesota. They like to have them, Travelers Insurance comes in and actually has students for their project model different outcomes. For example, this past year, they had them model the risk of someone committing insurance fraud. So that was the binary outcome, someone committing insurance fraud or not. And they gave them a bunch of data at their disposal to try and predict that. And whoever had the best model, they took them out to like a really nice, expensive dinner, which is like pretty cool. But also, like they get a really good model out of it. So it's a good deal on both sides. So anyway, these types of models might sound boring, but they can be useful for companies in a variety of ways, and of course many other applications as well outside of business. So anyway, here we have a lot of different candidate predictors at our disposal. So these first several columns are all continuous predictors. For example, this is like the max bill that someone's ever accrued on their credit card, the average balance that they have due. I'm not sure what these measures stand for exactly, to be honest, but they are potential predictors, information that we have at our disposal. The person's age in years, some sort of measure of the limit on their credit card here, and then the sex of the person, whether they're male or female, and then if they're married or not as well. So these are our categorical predictors here, whereas the other ones are continuous predictors. Okay. So just doing some exploratory data analysis here, I created some side-by-side box plots again. This time I used base R to do it. The code is a bit shorter than before. Just seeing whether or not someone defaults, if they have a different age distribution typically. So looking at these plots, it's very, very similar. So if we remember back to like the Penguins data set, let's remember how stark the difference was here. Very different, the box plots. So the distribution of bill lengths was very different by species. Down here, not so much. The age of people who default on their credit cards or not, at least in this data set, very similar. But we maybe can still consider it for our model, even though it's not obvious from this box plot. Looking at the balance limit by whether somebody defaults or not. A little bit of a difference here. So those who do not default look like they have a little bit higher of a balance limit on average than those who do. Okay. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm taking our response variable on the x-axis, the yes or no, and then a potential candidate continuous predictor on the y-axis, and then I'm making side-by-side box plots. So something to keep in mind, think about what is your binary response? That would go on the x-axis here. What is a continuous predictor for you? That would go on the y-axis here. Okay, and then like I said, here's the code to do that for you. All right. And let's take a look. So now let's fit this logistic model using R. So fitting a model with just balance limit to start, we can see it's statistically significant. The p-value is very small, but we also have 30,000 observations. That's what this is telling us. So always good to keep in mind that with really big data sets like this, where you have thousands and thousands of observations, pretty much anytime you have a predictor, if you throw it in the model, it's going to be statistically significant because p-values are also sort of a function of the sample size. So that as the sample size gets bigger, in general, p-values tend to get smaller. Okay, so it doesn't mean it's necessarily a super important predictor, but it's just that our data set is so big. But statistically significant nonetheless. If we remember back to some of the assumptions for logistic regression, one of them is that we have a linear relationship between the log odds of success, so in this case, the log odds of someone defaulting on their credit card, and our predictor, which in this case is the balance limit. So here we see a somewhat linear relationship, so that appears that that assumption appears fairly okay here. We do notice it's a little bit curved up, so this is concave up. And if we remember back to back from the textbook, and I discussed this in the slides some, when you have a concave up pattern in the points, sometimes it's helpful to do a log transformation of the predictor variable or a square root transformation, either one. So here we'll try this log transformation and see what that looks like instead. If the goal is that this will get more linear. Okay. So doing the log transformation of the balance limit, hey, look at that. The points are much closer to the line every time. Okay, if we looked back up here, there's a little bit more error. Now the points are in general closer. So, hey, it looks like our log transformation helped us out here. So that's pretty good. Now looking at the odds of defaults by the balance limit separated by whether someone was male or female, we're looking for a few things here. So we still want to see a linear relationship, which appears to be the case. And this is split up by men and women. So I'm not sure which, like if red is for males or if black is for males here, but we do see that there's a difference between the two groups. There's a like vertical shift between the two fitted lines. So that's suggesting that there's a difference in the risk of default between men and women here. And actually, now I remember, men had a higher rate of default, credit card default in this data set. So they must be the black line and women are red. Yeah, so the lines appear to be parallel though. They have the same sort of slope. It's not exactly the same, but in general, they're pretty parallel. So that suggests that we do not need an interaction between balance limit, the log balance limit, and the sex of the person. If the lines were perpendicular, if they were crossing or not parallel, what that would suggest here is that we need to also include an interaction term with log balance limit and sex, because it's saying the slope for that effect varies depending on the sex. That's what an interaction term means, as a reminder. So this is something to check for in your data set. You should certainly, because you'll be including a continuous predictor and a categorical predictor in your logistic model, you certainly should make this plot for your final project and check to discuss should we include an interaction term or not based on the plot. Okay. And if you have any questions about that, of course, feel free to email me and I'd be happy to help. So looking at another example, here this is the log balance limit by marital status. So I can't remember again which level is for which group, but we see a similar pattern here again, where it's a linear relationship within each group between the log odds and the log balance limit, and also a vertical shift. So the lines, again, do not seem to be perpendicular. They're parallel, suggesting we do not need an interaction term between the log balance limit and the marital status. Okay. But we do see that as the balance limit increases, the odds of default, it looks like, decrease, because we have this negative trend here. Okay. All right. And I discussed that about how the lines are parallel here, suggesting we do not need an interaction term. Okay. So we proceed including all of these things in our model, also adding an age, even though it didn't seem important. The p-value is sort of giving that away, suggesting that as well, and that it has the biggest p-value. All the other ones are very small, close to 0. Looking at this log odds for age, now we see what the issue is. This is not linear. There's this weird, for people very young, so here's what's happening. It seems a little reasonable that younger people, that would be us, maybe are a little bit more likely to, or apparently quite a bit more likely to default on our credit cards. So that's what's going on here. But then there's this big drop off. People get very responsible once they're 30, and then that slowly regresses worse over time to where they are steadily becoming more likely to default as they get older again. So there's this weird relationship where there's sort of this turning point when somebody's in their mid to late 20s, where they plummet in their odds of default and then steadily increase again as they get older. A very weird relationship. This is not easily fixed with just a squared transformation. You can take my word for it, or you can try it yourself and see how it does not work just to square age. If we just had concave up here, like just starting off, like if this point were excluded, maybe we could do age squared, and then that would be better, but this point messes everything up. So if you think about it, like how we could make this plot linear, although it's pretty complicated and I don't think advisable to do, is that we would need to, for example, take age minus where the derivative is 0 in this sort of, if you imagine this parabola. So at like 27, so we could calculate like a age transformed column that was like age minus 27, and then that quantity squared, doing that sort of transformation. Then we would see a linear relationship in the log odds between that and the new transformed column. But that's a little ugly and not very interpretable anymore. Might give us better predictions. So if you're just after predictions, accurate predictions, not a bad route to go. But in this case, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to just keep age as is and throw all the other stuff in our model here. Okay, and just to see how well we can predict, looking at how well it does in this data set, we see that, so here's what our logistic model predicted here. This is the GFIT4. Yeah, GFIT4, okay. So yeah, that was right here. We used all available predictors in our model with log transformed balance limit. Okay, and this confusion matrix here, which you can make using this code, shows how for our full data set, this is what our logistic model predicted. So yes, they default. And then here's how it actually was the ground truth. So for 812 observations, the person actually did not default, but our model predicted that they would. But there was 1,428 times when our model predicted they would default, and they did. And then similarly, it was correct over 22,000 times in predicting that someone would not default. So overall, it was correct about 24,000 times, and wrong, adding these ones up, about 6,000 times. So it was correct about 4 times as much as it was incorrect. Lots of room for improvement. So that is the logistic model here. So it's important to interpret coefficient effects too, although we've done that so much in class. I'm not going to do that again in this video here. I would encourage you to revisit videos if need be for interpreting coefficient estimates from this output. Okay, and confidence intervals might be something you could consider including in your reports as well. All right, so that's it for multiple linear regression and logistic regression review in this video. Now I'm going to show you guys, just for fun, for those who are interested, since we're at the end of the semester, add in a little bit different stuff, how to fit a neural network in R. So neural networks, all the rage these days. I don't know. I had never heard of these in undergrad. I don't know if you guys have heard of them. I feel like people love neural networks. They think they're like the panacea, as they say, the cure-all for everything, it feels like sometimes. But they're just another model at our disposal, I suppose. So I wanted to show you guys, if you're interested, how these work a little bit. So there's a lot of nice blog posts online that sort of explain how these work. Now that you guys have an understanding of linear regression, I think you'll be able to grasp much better how exactly this neural network is working. So just to set it up here, we have a very similar starting point as linear regression. Okay, we have predictors at our disposal, these x's. We consider this linear combination of the x's. So here the w's are sort of analogous, the w sub i's are analogous to the betas in our regression, linear regression, plus bias. I think the bias is analogous to the error term in linear regression here. Okay, and then the idea is you calculate this linear combination of the x's. R does this for us. And then it looks at, you get this, this quantity here. And so it's a function of x. And we have a value of 1 if this linear combination of the x's plus beta, which is like an intercept term sort of, is bigger than or equal to 0, and then plus b if it's less than 0. Or it's 0 if this quantity is negative. So this looks a little bit fancier, but this is sort of just a, this is a way to think about, this is for modeling a binary response here. And it's just using a linear combination of the x's. If it hits a certain threshold, the prediction is 1. Otherwise, if this fails to hit that certain threshold, the prediction is 0. And it uses some sort of optimization algorithm to calculate the optimal weights here for each of the x's. So very similar to linear regression. This is a neural network, they say, with 0 hidden layers, with no hidden layers. We just have this connection between the predictors and the response being this summation, this linear combination. Okay, and so the weights, and then the activation function here. Okay, that's what's connecting our predictor and our response value here. And if you want to see this blog post and where I got this image from, feel free to click this link here. Okay, so we can think about if the activation function, this is a step function here. So that's how they view this. It's either 0 or 1 at a certain point. You can pick different activation functions. So you can think for a linear activation function, this would actually be exactly the same as linear regression. Okay. But this isn't usually how people use neural networks. Usually they have hidden layers that are in between the summation bias part and the activation function here. There's hidden layers smooshed in between there. Okay, so now here we have like our 4 predictors again, or M input features they call them. That's just another word for predictors. People like to call them features in other fields. Like engineering, I think they tend to call them features instead of predictors or explanatory variables. So here we have like 4 predictors, and then we sort of have like these auxiliary type variables, these things in between the output layer and our predictors. And they call these the sort of neurons. That's what they refer to these purple parts in the neural network here. And they sort of view it as like you get this linear combination. Excuse the sirens outside my apartment. Sorry if those are loud. Maybe I'll wait a minute. Okay. We have a fire department pretty close by our apartment, so we hear them often. Hopefully everyone's okay. So yeah, sorry about that. Going back to this. So we have this blue circles representing our predictor variables here, and then they each get a corresponding weight again. So we have this linear combination of the the predictor variables here, and that is going to inform us. We can sort of think of it. We use those to try and predict what this value is going to be. And this is where it's like analogous to neurons, because if this linear combination of the predictor variables again hits a certain threshold, you can think about this fires or activates, and that's where it's sort of like a neuron. Otherwise, this is just set to 0 in terms of its effect for the next layer. Okay, and then similarly, this has a different set of weights for the variables for this neuron, and then a different set of weights for the variables for this neuron. And then these neurons are used with another function connecting these to the next layer, or this, in this case, just the output layer here. Okay, so you can just get successive layers, successive hidden layers. There's really no limit to how many you can do, and that's when they talk about like deep learning or deep neural networks. Commonly, I believe that's referring to a neural network with many hidden layers in this way. Okay, and so you can vary the number of predictors, the number of neurons in each hidden layer, and the number of hidden layers you have. So there's lots of things to choose in these models. They're very complicated in terms of that, and that there's lots of choice along the way. So yeah, so that's just I'd like to make clear I have a pretty limited understanding of neural networks. I've only taken one class where we used them before, but I thought I'd still introduce them here for you guys today, because fitting them in R, whether we fully understand the math and how this works or not, fitting them in R is pretty easy relative. So once we know how to fit GLMs, so looking at this code, we use the carrot package here to fit this neural network. So doing a little bit of pre-processing of our data beforehand, we can just fit the neural network just using this code. And there's different parameters, different sort of tuning parameters for this. This size variable is representing the number of neurons. I'm just fitting a single neural network here, and I'm considering using either 2, 4, or 6 neurons in it. And then I think this decay parameter is like it shrinks the weights closer to 0 or not. I believe that's how that works. So lots of different tuning parameters here. And this is like how many iterations in the optimization algorithm until it converges that we give it. And yeah, so we fit this model, store it in here, and then we can just get predicted values, just like a logistic model. So getting these predicted values here, I see this is the This is the performance. I accidentally printed it twice. This is not for the logistic model down here. I'll fix that before I post it. These are our predicted values from the neural network. So we see, let's see how many got wrong, like 1157 and then 4500 there. We looked back at the logistic model, 1157 and okay. So it got like 300 more of these ones wrong, but then this one was like 5100 here. It got like 600 more of these right. So it got 300 more of these ones wrong, but then 600 more of these right. So net, it got like 300 more correct than the logistic model did. So hey, depending on what your goal is, if your goal is to just detect more fraud, then you'd probably want to go, you want the one that has the most yes and yes. So 1984 versus 1428. So if your goal is just to detect the most fraud and you don't care if you accidentally think someone committed fraud but they didn't, go with the neural network here. But if you're really concerned about, if you say yes, you want to make sure they really did not commit fraud, the neural network too often is thinking someone actually committed fraud when they did not. 1157 times it did that, but the logistic model only made that mistake 812 times. So probably you'd want to lean toward not accusing people of fraud if they didn't do it more often. So obviously there's a lot of room for improvement in both of these models still. But yeah, this is just an example of how we can do this to start. So yeah, and again, I have this link that links to the blog post that discusses this, if you're curious about that. Otherwise, this will be posted on Moodle, and I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving break. I look forward to reconnecting next week, Monday, where we'll have an in-person or a Zoom class session to make up for not having one this week, where I'll look at your guys' final projects with you and help you with anything you have going on. So thanks, and have a good holiday.